Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Today is Friday, August 7th, 2020. 2020, unbelievable this year, right? So we're very excited for today's Khatera. Today, Ibrahim Souadda will be talking about brotherhood and sisterhood. The Khatera will discuss understanding the context we live in, the elements of being a three-dimensional human, and how to garner brotherhood and sisterhood. Following the Khatera, we will have our community learning dialogue program, very popular amongst the crowd. Zahra Cheema will be discussing rewriting the stories we tell ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beautiful names, and we're really looking forward to hearing that talk. So Ibrahim, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you for joining us, and inshallah we'll get started now.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone's Jummah has been going well. I'd like to just quickly preface this for whoever is watching that I am severely underqualified to be doing this Khatera. There's many more qualified people in the community. And so just know that what I'm sharing it's not my words. They're not my ideas. They're just some reflections from some of my teachers and people that I've had conversations with. But I'm simply just an aspiring artist, not more than that. Alhamdulillah, we'll get started. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله في الكتاب الكريم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, O you who believe, have consciousness of Allah as He deserves and die not except in the state of Islam. So like our wonderful host, my mother, mashallah, said, I wanted to talk about brotherhood and sisterhood, understand what that means, but understand it within the context that we live in. Some of the people that I spend time with, we reflect on this often about why we are the way we are and how did we come about to think the way we think. And so specifically for our purposes, we'll be talking about the American context, and the first place the people I spend time with thought to start is with history, and understanding how America came to be what it was. And so really have to start back to the very beginning, when the Pilgrims left England. You kind of have to think about why did they leave, and we know that they left to escape religious persecution. Protestant pilgrims were escaping from a Catholic king at the time. Why is this important? Why is understanding the history important? Why is understanding the context important? And I find a quote from Dr. Suleiman Yang really kind of sums it up, and he says, text without context is pretext. And so really, if you don't understand the context in which you live in, moving forward becomes very difficult. So again, just jumping back into the history, in Europe at the time, the dominant expression of faith out of the Vatican was Catholicism. And so the response to Catholicism popularly came from a man named Martin Luther. And most people jump to Martin Luther King, but this is a different man. Martin Luther, he was a German Protestant reformist who came out with some ideas that were differing from the Catholic Church. A lot of those had to do with accessibility to the Word of God and things like that. And so needless to say, he started causing a really big ruckus. And understanding why this came to America is important because of the way America has affected globalization. What happens in America affects everyone. So even if you're an immigrant, our ideas our American ideas have permeated your culture in some way. And so it's really important for us to understand what that Protestant Christianity looked like in the early years of America, and how did that affect other countries and their thought process. So, we know that early American history, especially within the first 100 years, was predominantly Protestant. And actually, statisticians note that if it wasn't for an influx of Latin American immigrants, it would have been still a majority Protestant country. And in fact, we know that we didn't even have a Catholic president until JFK in the 60s. And that was a really big deal in and of itself. So why is understanding the Protestant version of Christianity in America, especially in the early years, important? And this is because of a man named Max Weber. He was a sociologist, a German sociologist, and he coined the term called Protestant work ethic. And the best way for me to sum it up is with a truck commercial that I saw on TV that went something like this. In big, bold block letters, the narrator would say, "We are Americans. We don't spend time with our families. We don't have time for vacation. We're Americans." So this kind of summed up the commercial symbolism of the idea of Protestant work ethic. What Protestant work ethic really was, though, is a system based on individualism, that every human being has to find salvation on their own, that you don't have a priest that's going to give you confession. You're completely on your own. This idea is not completely foreign to Muslims. However, the secondary element of this Protestant work ethic was that it was based on this notion that wealth and personal success is the proof that God is happy with you. So this is the second element in which we stray from as Muslims, right? This idea of having an individual relationship with God is common for us. But the second element, that the evidence of God's love for you was proven through worldly success. And so this became the basis at which the original pilgrims began to, one, cultivate their relationship with God, but also directly affected the relationships they built with the people around them. Because now their success in the new world, their worldly success, put them in direct competition with their neighbors, because they weren't just competing for land and goods. The reality was that for them, they were competing for God's pleasure, but through monetary means, through worldly means. And so this is how you get to the point where you see like mega church evangelical priests raising $500,000 for private planes and things like that. And for me personally, I find Muslims kind of start to toe this very fine line, especially when we're at our fundraising events. And so you start hearing things like, you donate your money and Allah will multiply. And this is true, but the intention behind that sometimes perhaps a bit questionable. And so this, puts us as Muslims, how do we contextualize this for us? How has this thought process of worldly gains and worldly success affected our day-to-day lives? And so, for example, you might find in the pursuit of marriage that a very wealthy doctor in the community could potentially have a shoddy personality, but because he's attained a certain level of success in the community and he's got a couple degrees and he's a doctor and things like that, him getting married is not going to be really challenging. However, you might have a high school teacher who's got really great manners and a very good character and a good knowledge of the deen and things like that, but he has a hard time getting married because societally he's not doing something that's deemed important enough or a mark of success. And so in reflection of this, we think about our great predecessors, and who comes to mind is Ali radiallahu anh. And we, in thinking about it, you know, had Ali radiallahu an lived in this time today, if you didn't know who he was, there's a really good chance you're probably not going to marry your daughter to him in this day and age. Why? Because Ali radiallahu an, before he was the Khalifa, his job was to carry well water to an older Jewish man in the community. But this is also the man that the Prophet ﷺ gave his most beloved, smartest, most spiritual, most educated daughter, you know, whom Abu Bakr proposed to and Umar proposed to, and the Prophet ﷺ said no to all of them, and he gave him to Ali. So what was valued to the Prophet ﷺ is not really what we value today. This type of work ethic and this type of way of seeing the world has permeated our consciousness in a really abrasive way. Our communities are plagued with false notions of success. And oftentimes these become cultural, and we put that on the deen, and it's creating breakdowns in our community that make it difficult for us to cultivate real relationships with people. We have become a people that strive for check marks and validation on paper. And this really starts in the American school system. You know, if you think back to high school, they have things called the National Honor Society, and these things weren't ever meant to really bring about honor. Like, we don't join them because we want to be honorable, but we join them because we know they're going to get us into college. And if you look even before that in our Sunday schools, for those of us that attended, you know, you were graded by a check or a check plus or a check minus. And, you know, depending on what you brought home, really depended on your interaction with your parents and a lot of those things moving forward. And so your whole life begins to revolve around, did you get the right check mark, or did you get an A, or did you get this high GPA, or did you get this bonus? And so when we think about the religion and we think about what it means, it's like your intentions, your actions are by your intentions. What does it mean for us when we live our lives having the intention for getting an A or getting a check plus? And so that very much becomes the reason why we live our lives, deeply rooted in this idea of external success. And unfortunately, one of the many sad things about wiping out the Native Americans, the original people of this country, outside of it being an intrinsically tragic situation, is that we wiped out an entire civilization that, had they been here, would have completely undermined these notions of success. They were a civilization that was based on collective success. Their civilization in large part was based on spiritual success and honor, but not just personal and social mobility. You know, so it's not to say that there's no honor in America. You know, we don't make sweeping conclusions like this, but the sad fact that I've seen is that most of us are living very lonely lives, you know, put into a system that drives us with one kind of thought process. How can I keep moving up this social ladder? How can I get the next bonus? How can I get the next raise? How can I get the higher position? And who do I have to beat out and elbow out to get there? So what's the result of this history? Now that we kind of understand the context, you know, what does this practically look like? So when I was in college and in the MSA and things like that, I would hear stories of people, you know, that go to school and they meet people their freshman year, and they look at these people around them and they're convinced these people are going to be my friends for life. You know, you invest so much time and so much energy into cultivating what you feel is a successful relationship. And then, you know, summer rolls around and somehow you go 3 months without talking to these people. And then eventually you graduate, or just the next year comes around and you end up realizing that you weren't connected in something that was rooted, right? You end up, these people become relegated to Facebook contacts for the rest of your life. And God forbid you get a new Facebook account, they're completely forgotten. It's like a real anxiety that people have, that every year you find yourself, at least at a university level, oftentimes making new best friends every year. And then once you get out of college, then what? Once you've been able to achieve what you wanted to, you got your degree, you got the car, you got the job, maybe you got married, all those people that you spent so much time with, day and night with, all of a sudden disappear. And then, of course, he just passed, and I'm sure many of us got those generic mass text messages. Oh, hey, salam, everybody, I missed you. What have you been up to? Eid Mubarak. And you have to wonder to yourself, if you really missed me, why is this the first time I'm hearing from you? And why does the text message like very clearly look like it was copied and pasted? And so it's this type of like disingenuous actions that really start to affect the hearts of individuals. But at the same time, we also propagate that. And so why? Why is it like this? One famous psychologist, Carl Jung, proposes that we're not in the habit of actually loving people for who they are, but rather we find ourselves loving their ability to love us. And oftentimes we find that to be proven in that when you find someone is reciprocating affection to you, your love for them increases by the fact that they've reciprocated affection towards you. And so you find this common ground of like, okay, I love me, you love me, cool, we both love the same person, now I love you too. And so you wonder, what happens when a friendship falls apart, or when someone you loved breaks your heart? What is your attitude towards that person? If you find yourself in a place of complete disdain for that individual, you have to now ask yourself, did I ever really love them? Because love in and of itself is meant to be something that is selfless, that how the other person feels about you is irrelevant. And so because we're not in the habit of doing that, when we read, the great love poems of the past, or even when we look at the relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had with Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, or the other Sahabas, it becomes difficult for us to connect to this level of friendship that they had, this level of love that they had for each other, so much so that on the battlefield, these people would throw themselves in front of swords and arrows. They were willing to lay their life for the Prophet ﷺ. For us to be able to really understand what that relationship looks like is very difficult for us, because we haven't been in a position to have that genuine of a relationship with someone. That we haven't cultivated the internal spiritual and heart tools to love someone in such a way that you'd be willing to die for them. And so we find ourselves having very utilitarian relationships and having what I would call selfish love, not selfless love. And it comes from a need to feel like you need to be cared for. Because no one wants to be that guy or girl that's going to the movie theater by themselves. And so, if we don't get constant likes on Facebook and Instagram, and people aren't sharing our statuses, and we feel like people don't like us. So we have these very superficial friendships and relationships with people that we forget what it even feels like to have an honest and genuine relationship with someone that's not predicated on how many mutual friends you have, or how many times they've liked your stuff, or how many times they've shouted you out, or anything like that. And we find that we're living these very lonely lives. In my reading and in my conversation with my teachers, I found that if you don't have a three-dimensional life, the three dimensions being a vertical dimension, one being that, our dimension with the heavens, a horizontal dimension, our relationship with humanity, and then the z-axis, an internal dimension, a relationship with our heart. That if we don't cultivate and honor and grow these three relationships, we find ourselves being flat, two-dimensional, right? Two-dimensional spirituality or faith, and not having that three-dimensional, you're depriving yourself of really happiness. And we get this idea from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he says to have taqwa of Allah wherever you are, living as if Allah is watching you. And so that's where we get the vertical dimension of our relationship with Allah. Follow a bad deed with a good deed and it will erase it. That's your heart, purifying it, right? And treat people in the best way possible. That's our relationship with humanity. And so to be able to do these three things ultimately is what leads to holistic happiness and allows you the ability to have selfless love, right? If you only care about what people think of you, people will always let you down. Unfortunately, we find ourselves not in the habit of relying on Allah for our happiness and for our reliance and sustainability and that feeling of being cared for. Right? The Prophet ﷺ teaches us, he says that love people, but don't love them too much because one day they might be your enemy. And it's okay to dislike people, but don't hate them too much because one day they might be your brother or your sister. So the Prophet ﷺ here is teaching us to be careful with our hearts and to be careful with our emotions, and that don't be extreme in any one way, right? Emotionally, be in the middle. If the Prophet ﷺ's emotional stability came from people, what would have happened when his own people, his own family, kicked him out of Mecca and tried to hurt him and called him names and things like that? If his emotional stability wasn't rooted with Allah, where would we be today? And so unless you anchor your deen in the heavens with Allah, the one who loves you unconditionally, the one who you may disobey all night and he still allows the sun to rise for you. If you don't put your love in Allah in that way, recognizing who he is, that imagine that if Allah only allowed the sun to rise for those that obeyed him, many of us, I can at least say for myself, would be living in a very dark world. And so if we're not putting our love and putting our stability in the one who creates stability, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And so happiness really becomes a balance of these three things: heaven, heart, and humanity. The Prophet ﷺ also tells us that your belief in God is in question if you don't love for your brother what you love for yourself. And I think we take this as a token phrase sometimes, and we don't really internalize it and let it settle into what does that really mean for us. And I might throw up an example that if you're working in an office, they might offer a bonus, right, for the person that does X, Y, or Z. And so oftentimes we find ourselves in this competitive mentality where who do I need to elbow out, or whose power do I need to turn off, or whose computer can I unplug to make sure they fail and I succeed. Where we could be shifting our mindset to that, like my teachers. And this is something I've observed, and I hope he doesn't see this, but one of my teachers, Sheikh, Akainde Mendis, the thing that I've observed in him is that if you're in a home with him and you're offered fruit from a bowl, what he's done on every occasion I've been with him is that he'll find the most spoiled of the fruit and he'll take it. For me, in that observation, I've understood that to be deen. That is the religion for me. And so truly living for people and for Allah is really what it becomes about. Not living an individualistic life where let me take the best fruit and make sure everybody else gets whatever is left over. So when I see myself as an individual traversing through life and everyone else is just a random character, I'm a filmmaker. So if I look at everyone in my life as just a random character, an extra in my life, it's easy for me to treat them poorly because they're really not consequential in my life. They're just people that are there at the time I need them, and then I move on. Whereas if we change the lens to where I'm not, the lead character with my name in big, bold letters, and then I don't even mention the other people, whereas we're all a part of this one big movie together, and every time we cross paths with someone, it's with intention, understanding that the qadr of Allah is in play and that every person that enters your life and leaves your life is by the will of Allah. And for that, we should be happy. And for whatever they teach us, whether that be through something positive or something that we feel is negative, it's something to be thankful for because Allah decreed it to be that way. So to summarize, in conclusion, I know is a lot. There's some history and then there's some reflections, but if you were to take away just a couple of things, one is what one of my teachers calls the 3 H's. So just remembering heaven, heart, and humanity, that we are meant to live 3-dimensional lives, focusing on our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our relationship with ourselves, with our heart, and our relationship with humanity. That we should remember intentions come from us, but actions and results are from Allah. So remember to have good intentions rooted in the service of Allah, and then anything that comes after that is the decree and the will of Allah. And there's nothing we can do about that. Want for your brother what you want for yourself in a real way. That if there's a bonus being offered, you should want your brother to receive that bonus. That doesn't mean you don't work hard, but it means that you're actively thinking about other people. And it's a beautiful thing when not just you're doing that, but everyone in the community is doing that. And that way, holistically, we're all thinking about each other. Love others for the sake of Allah and nothing more than that. To have expectations of something to receive back from them or to love the fact that they love you will lead you to heartache. So just love Allah for the sake of Allah because they're the creatures of Allah and Allah put them on this earth for a reason. And the fact that you met them meant that they were in your life for a reason, for no matter what period of time. Right? Don't allow people in your life to be nothing more than extras. Everyone's life is meaningful and their role in your life is meaningful, whether you realize it at the moment or not. Right? And know that we can be like the Sahabas. Again, Muslims are in a really interesting time right now. The Sahabas had the relationship they had with themselves and with the Prophet ﷺ because of the amount of turbulation they went through together. The bond that the Sahabas had in Mecca was not the same as the bond that they had in Medina. Right? So Muslims are going through a great time of turbulation right now. And so we have the opportunity as a community to band together in the way the Sahabas did when Islam came to us for the first time. Alhamdulillah, that's my little spiel. Inshallah, I pray Allah makes our bonds grow and our communities, strengthen, and that we learn to support each other, and help each other to thrive as a community, and not so much be worried about just ourselves. Alhamdulillah.
Ameen. Jazakallah khair, Ibrahim. Mashallah, there were a lot of comments during your talk. I won't read through them all, but your talk really resonated with a lot of people, and mashallah, I would suggest that you read through the comments. Mashallah, if you have any additional comments that you'd like to make after our next speaker's talk, based on the comments that you're reading. So mashallah, it was quite excellent. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and energy that you bring to us. So Sister Zahra, we're so excited for you to speak. So inshallah, good to see you. Thank you for joining us, mashallah. You can unmute yourself. And I'm going to turn things over to you. We're really looking forward to your talk today. Again, Sister Zahra will be speaking on rewriting the stories we tell ourselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beautiful names. So Sister Zahra, this is your first time joining us and we're excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And wa alaikum assalam. Would I be able to get the screen share option? Okay, let me do that.
You will. Let me just turn that on.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. You should be able to do it now.
Okay. Whoop, that might be there we go. Okay, are you able to see it?
Yes. Excellent.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Brother Ibrahim, I agree with all the comments that really resonated with me on different levels. I love the 3 H's. I think that's going to be a takeaway for me. That was really a nice way to put it and a way to remember it. So as Sister Nicole said, my name is Zahra Cheema, and I'll try my best to maintain eye contact. I know it's a little weird with Zoom, but I have my notes down here as well. So I'll be speaking with you today from the perspective of a fellow seeker. And I'm going to be sharing a personal story of how Allah has been teaching me to rewrite my stories using his beautiful names. And it was interesting when Brother Ibrahim was talking about, you know, many of us have been socialized to really view external success as the measure of success. I feel like there's stories that we tell ourselves that we've picked up from society around us as well. So by rewriting my stories through God's beautiful names, it's really changed the way that I see the world, I see myself, and most importantly, my relationship with Allah. So I've broken my presentation up into chapters. I'm a bit of a writer. I dabble in writing. So I've kind of presented this as a story with chapters. Don't worry, it's 3 chapters. And the slides are really just to kind of go through each section. Just for those of you who are on audio, you're not missing anything on the slides. So if you ask me if I'm a storyteller, I would probably say no. I've always been interested in writing and in stories ever since I can remember. As a kid, I would make up stories for my sock puppet shows, and in college, I would write human interest stories as a journalism major, but I never really saw myself as a storyteller. It's only recently that I learned I am absolutely a storyteller and that we all are storytellers. Every single day, we tell ourselves stories, and if you're like me, you tell yourself many, many stories every day. I have stories about how I see myself, what I think of other people, how I see the world, and most importantly, how I see God. Over the past few years, Allah has been showing me how many of my stories are not based on his truth and how they end up causing me pain. Chapter 1, Hearing My Stories. So I first really started hearing my stories and listening to them a few years ago. I call that period of my life my awakening. You know, I'm a writer, so I can be dramatic at times too. So I call it my awakening. And at that time, I considered myself a practicing Muslim. I was someone who prayed every day. I fasted during Ramadan, and I gave zakat. I tried to do my best and to be my best, but I felt like God was distant and was getting further and further away. I remember wanting and yearning to feel close to God in my heart, but I didn't know what was standing in my way, and frankly, I felt stuck. And my awakening happened at a time when a series of events happened around me, not to me, but around me, that were really hard for me to understand. And I realized that the stories I had been telling myself weren't able to explain what I was experiencing and seeing around me. And yeah, I remember feeling lost. And somehow in the midst of all that, Allah was letting me know that this was an opening, that this was an invitation to know him better, and that it was my false stories that were standing in the way between me and Allah. So I started to notice my thoughts and actually hear my thoughts, which before I probably had never paid attention to. I'm sure they were there just as background noise in my subconscious. And when I started listening to them, I realized that my stories really revealed how much fear I was carrying around with me. I was surprised to hear a lot of what if stories about the future that I was telling myself, and how many should have stories I had created about the past. One of the major stories I was telling myself was what was missing in my life, what was lacking. It's still so incredibly amazing to me that our Islamic tradition warns us about these types of stories, the what if and the should have stories. There's a hadith that says, the messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, said, "Strive for that which will benefit you. Seek the help of Allah and do not feel helpless. If anything befalls you, do not say, if only I had done such and such. Rather say, Allah has decreed, and whatever he wills, he does." For saying if opens the door to the deeds of Satan. So one of my first practices when I started this journey of like hearing my stories was to pay attention to how many what if and should have thoughts I had. And I did that. I feel like I did that for several months, and it's something I still continue to do, because obviously the what ifs and should haves, at least for me, never stop, and that's part of the journey. But I'm learning how to view them with a lot more perspective and how to be aware of them. Chapter 2, who is God? So I started wondering that, wait a minute, if I'm carrying so much fear around in myself and I'm focusing on what's missing in my life, but at the same time, I'm also someone who says that I believe and rely on God, then something isn't adding up. So I really started to wonder, like, what do I really think of God? Like, what is the ugly truth? And the answer was not pretty at all. Somehow over the years, I don't know when or how, I started up making a story of a harsh and unloving God. I was in a group once and someone mentioned that a lot of people see God as Santa Claus. I know it's not the best example, but it stuck with me. It kind of worked. The idea of like, a figure that like when you're good gives you gifts, and when you're not, you know, it kind of like turns away from you. And, you know, I've learned obviously that Allah says he's ever present to everybody. So that was another one of my false stories. And I was so deep in my own story of who I thought that God was, that I kept forgetting that God keeps reminding us that he's Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the all-compassionate, the most generous, the ever-merciful. And I remember at one point just saying out to myself, I don't know who God is. And so I started to ask, who is God? How do I get to know him? And how does God define himself? Because I was like, I'm going to the source now. Like there's there's no time. I just, you know, was ready. And this led me to his beautiful names. So if you asked me a few years ago, like, hey, what are these beautiful names that you're talking about? I would have said, oh, it's a list of 99 names of God's attributes. And they say that, you know, people who memorize them will be blessed with paradise. So I knew it was a list. I knew it was good to memorize it, but but that's really as deep as it went for me at that point. I was like, okay, one day I'll memorize it. Like, my heart really wasn't connected to the concept of what these names really are. And then Allah guided me to a wonderful Quranic scholar named Dr. Yamina Buganaya. And through her, he showed me and continues to show me his beauty through his names. And what was at one time just a list for me is now a path to knowing God. And Dr. Yamina stresses the importance of experiencing God's names in our everyday lives, that we have the ability to witness and taste God's beautiful names, not just to show, not just to say, oh yeah, God is the most merciful because it says it in the Quran and I'm a believer, so therefore I believe, but really to go deeper and to really confirm for yourself, to say, I feel that, I know it to be true because it's true in my everyday life. It's true in my inner world as well. And the important thing, the first step was to make an intention to put on these, these glasses of the beautiful names and to make it a daily practice. And that was a game changer for me. I say that I had a paradigm shift. I don't say that anymore now though, but at least in the beginning, I was like, oh, the way I see the world has completely changed. That instead of seeing a cold, harsh world filled with bad news, I started seeing a world filled with God's light and compassion, a compassion that shines down on everything and every person on earth, regardless of who they are. I started looking for God in everything. And knowing that every single one of us has full access to God at all times. It's also changed the way that I see myself. And this time, these stories weren't based on false stories that I was making up by myself. These were based on the truth that Allah tells us about in the Quran, and that I was able to start practicing to see and feel around me and within me. Chapter 3, God's beautiful names. So what does that mean? How do you taste the beautiful names? What does it mean to taste these names? So instead of me trying to kind of explain it to you, I thought I can do a short, just a small exercise. So if you would like to join in, please do so. And what I'll do is I'll start off by kind of giving, I'll go ahead and give some examples and then kind of invite everyone to join in if they'd like. So I'm going to mention a name of God. So I've chosen about 3. And if you can just allow yourself to listen and to sit with the name and just think of ways today of how you felt or witnessed this name. And if it's, if it's kind of too hard or it's just not happening for today, think about yesterday, think about this past week. Just take some time to reflect. And so the tip that I have for you is that finding the connection to the name and your daily life, it's usually one of the millions of small things throughout our day that we might see as insignificant when we don't have the glasses of the beautiful names on. So one of the words is al-wadud, which I think there's a group of words that kind of resonates with each of us in different ways, and that kind of has messages for us and talks to us in different ways. And al-wadud was and is a big one for me, which is the loving, the affectionate, the one who warms hearts, the source of all love. And so if you could, if you'd like to close your eyes, you're invited to do that just to kind of bring focus internally. You don't have to do so. And just listen to the word al-wadud, the loving, the affectionate, the one who warms hearts. So just think about if there's anything today, yesterday, through this week where you felt you received love or you felt love. And again, it can be in the small things. So my example is I went for a walk this morning, and one of my neighbors was walking their small dog, and small dogs are just the most adorable thing to me. And so I felt like this instant like warmth and adoration inside for this tiny little creature that I got to see this morning. And it reminded me that the source of what I'm feeling, this adoration, is linked to the source of all adoration, the source of all affection, the source of all love. So if you would like, you're feel free to share in the chat if you'd like. Don't worry, I won't make anyone speak up, but if you can just, yeah, if anything came to your mind. The second word is al-jamil, which is the beautiful. So again, if you just kind of stop and think, where throughout your day did you stop and think that's beautiful? And maybe you didn't think it, maybe it was just like something that made you stop. So outside I saw a butterfly on a flower that made me stop. I heard a bird that I had heard when as a child, when my parents took us to visit my grandfather's village in Pakistan. And so the sound of that bird, it reminded me of a beautiful memory I had. And so I know the source of that beauty came from the beautiful. The last word is al-Nasir. So again, if you just take a minute, and al-Nasir means the helper. So today, yesterday, or this week, where did you feel or taste this beautiful divine name? Maybe you were able to provide someone with some help. Maybe someone provided you with some help. Or perhaps you maybe were watching the news, you saw some hard news, and deep inside you had this instinct to just help, even if you didn't know how. So I know for me, when I started reflecting on the names in this way, I really realized that the beautiful names are all around me every day. And they've helped me rewrite some of my stories. So for example, as I mentioned before, one of the stories was, oh, God feels so far and distant. But I know that when I have the lens of the beautiful names, God is all around me. He's all present and all sustaining. When I pay attention, when I make the intention, I can see it all around me. Another one of my stories was, God is harsh and unloving, and al-Wadud really just, sinks that story, because I know that every time I feel love for something or receive love, it is coming from the divine source, and Allah is showing me his love through that. And this reminds me of kind of a funny little story of my friend who's on right now too. I didn't tell her I'd be telling this funny little story. So Dr. Yamina, the Quranic scholar who I mentioned, reminds us that we are honored guests of God on this earth. And so we had, my friend and I had finished a hike in a state park, and we were just kind of, getting ready to walk out and exit the park. And I've already described my love for small, adorable things. So I saw two bunnies pop up, and I'm pretty much like a little kid. I'll like point and stare and say bunny. And that memory sticks in my head because what she said, like she had the glasses of the beautiful names on, and she said, SubhanAllah, Allah knows how much you love bunnies, and he he brought like these bunnies are here for you. And I just thought that's amazing. Like, I wish I could live like that 24/7. But it's a journey. And one step in the right direction is a really, really good step. So, you know, do my old stories pop up? Yeah, all the time. Sometimes they take hold of me and shake me, and I end up believing them. And other times I can kind of like step back and just observe them and let them and see them as false stories and let them pass. And I also know that the false stories teach me something, because when they start kind of taking over my thinking, they act as a red flag for me, and they let me know that I am starting to forget about God's beautiful names. And that leads me to remembrance. So now I know that when God starts to feel far, it's not that he's moving away, but that I'm drifting away, because God never goes. As the Hadith Qudsi states, Allah says, "He who draws close to me a hand's span, I will draw close to him an arm's length. And whoever draws near me an arm's length, I will draw near him a fathom's length. And whoever comes to me walking, I will go to him running." Sorry, that always gets me. So the last thing, it's related. I think one huge thing for me too was when I reflect on it, when I was like, you know, kind of in my pre-awakening days, I realized that, oh, sorry, I didn't keep an eye on the time. Okay. I realized that gratitude was non-existent. I mean, how could gratitude exist in me when I was just looking at, you know, if I was filled with fear and looking at everything I didn't have, then obviously like gratitude had no chance. And I feel that when, you know, doing the practice of the beautiful names, like it helps like, I think gratitude just naturally like spills from that. And something that Dr. Yamina said that was really kind of an aha moment for me, which might seem simple now, but she's like, you know, these things are these are choices we make. These are intentions. And it's a practice you have to implement. So, you know, rather than thinking like, because I was someone at one point who did pray and fast, and perhaps I thought like, oh, the rest will just take care of itself. But I learned that it doesn't. It is the prayers and all the other tools that Allah has blessed us with are acts, are tools of remembrance, and that this constant God consciousness is kind of the real gift. At least for me, it's been really, really important. And so kind of like the beautiful names little exercise we did, that's one way to kind of practice some gratitude. I know sometimes I have this really great divine names book, and they have like a page or two about each name. And so, you know, sometimes I'll go through that and reflect on a name. I also use it sometimes as a little bit of medicine. So if there's a day where I'm like kind of like not feeling the love or something, you know, if something happens, I'll like flip to the book, go to Al Wadud, and like soak it in and use that as remembrance as well. So that is all I had. Thank you so much for allowing me to share. And I did want to say, just in like, this is a journey. Like, I keep falling down. But I think the ability to just like get up and just to know that this path just feels so beautiful. Like it is the truth. And I think that's what's like, inshallah, it like gets easier and easier to be on this. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Sister Zahra. That was wonderful, mashallah. We have so many amazing comments. I would like to read one comment from Sister Tasnia, both for you, Ibrahim, and you, Sister Zahra. She said, she's so grateful for both presentations. I really loved Brother Ibrahim's presentation of how we have all these identities, whether it's a mom, a teacher, a wife, a friend. And when we take these identities to heart, I feel like we live in a world of scarcity. We get so drained to live up to those check marks and chasing after the love of what these identities gives us. And always feeling like we have to give more and more, but it just drains us. So she totally vibes with what Brother Ibrahim said, and Sister Zahra's comments about living with the names of God. She finds abundance instead of scarcity here, this being Allah is hosting us, inviting us, and just full of giving and loving us. And for once, she feels like this is being who she can be and taking care of us and don't have any fake identity with him. So, mashallah, thank you, Sister Tasnia. Inshallah, I hope I did you justice by reading it properly, inshallah. Again, thank you both so much. Our speakers were excellent today. Sister Gail, I'm going to ask you to unmute your microphone. We have a few announcements.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, my sisters and brothers. Our announcements will be brief. Please visit our new website at mainlinemuslimsociety.org, where you can contribute to our ongoing projects through the Amana Foundation. Thank you in advance for your contribution. Our next youth program will be on Thursday, August 27th. We will read a story about Musa, peace be upon him. The program will be for children in elementary school. However, all ages are welcome. Save the August 27th date and look for details in the upcoming weeks. There is a link on our webpage, mainlinemuslimsociety.org, where you can find the recordings of our Friday programs. We're also live on Facebook. Please share this information with other members of our community. Your board of directors are here to serve the community. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you or someone you know is sick, please let us know through our Zoom chat so we can say dua for them. Your attention has been appreciated. Thank you. Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you so much, Sister Gail. Before everyone leaves today, I'd like us collectively, if we could, to make dua for the victims of the bombing in Beirut this week. And there was a tragic earthquake in Algeria this morning. So inshallah, hopefully there aren't many casualties. I haven't heard any of the details yet, but inshallah, there are so many tragedies happening every day around the world. If we could all read Fatiha together, I will unmute everyone. I'll give everyone the ability to unmute themselves. And inshallah, if we could make dua together, read Fatiha, I would appreciate it. Give me 1 second and I will allow you to unmute yourself. Okay, so if everyone could please unmute themselves, we'll read Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Jazakallah khair, everyone. Thank you so much. Make a dua for each other. We are brothers and sisters in Islam. We are a community, inshallah. The love between us comes only after the love we have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, again, make dua for one another. Have a blessed week. Juma Mubarak to all. And inshallah, we'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Jazakallah khair.
Wa alaikum, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, Sophia.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.